Please start.
I start now on Saul Bellow's Herzog.
Thank you, sir.
There is a famous passage, in Lionel Trilling's essay, Manners, Morals, and the Novel, in Liberal Imagination, the book that he wrote in 1950, in which he declares that the true fiction of manners to be impossible in America. Fiction of manners is impossible in America because the texture of American social life is too thin to grant manners more than passing interest in our lives. Recalling Henry James' observation on the thinness of American social institutions, Tilling agrees that there is no sufficiency of means for the display of variety of manners, no opportunity for the novelist to do his job of searching out reality, not enough complications of experience or appearance to make it a job interesting. So, Saul Bellow, you know, is representative of urban life. He was born in Quebec, Canada, French-speaking province of Canada, to Yiddish-speaking parents. Yiddish is a kind dialect, in spoken in America and Canada. Yiddish parents, who had only recently fled from Russia, has taken up literary position that had previously been held by patrician and Anglophile Bostonian, for it is a feature of modern Jewish experience that learning to live between worlds may be a price of surviving in any one of them. To live between the worlds, you know. As immigrant means displaced person or holder of dual citizenship, the Jew finds a correct interpretation of foreign signs a vital part of his daily routine. The Jew, although they are very rich, Jews, the problem of Israel is also of the Jews. In America, you have so many Jews, who are very rich, and it is believed that they run American life as such. But they are suffering jokers. The Jew is a suffering joker. Saul Bellow's Herzog is also a Jew, and is a suffering joker. And cutting edge of sharp sensibility, such habits of irony and weariness that may come to a shuttling between worlds of language breed natural forms of anthropological wonder, amphibians that they are. Bellow calls his Humboldt's gift, that kind of thing. Anyway, Bellow wrote, so many novels before he started Herzog. Seize the Day is one novel, 1956. Herzog was written in 1964 and Humboldt's Gift in 1975. He has never been social novelist as such, and although the derelictions of modern society are now an almost obsessive theme in his writing, he can still be regarded as a social writer only in the term of properly, if the term is properly hedged with provisions of and qualifications. So mood is the central figure of his novel. He was originally and remains primarily a novel of mood and character. Mood and character. This is very important. And conflict between them. Mood is given, in fact, of effect of life beyond the reach of conscious will, except under special therapeutic arrangements. The last analysis then he wrote in 64 again. Henderson the Rain King he wrote in 1959. I will not go into the details of these novels because then it will take most of my time. So all these, moods as such, they are depicted in these novels. It's a struggle to come to grips with them that ultimately counts in his books. Bellow is a moralist of his heroes. Moralist, that is very important, that you stand above the common run of humanity. And his hero's ability to face what is given historically or psychologically is usually a moral point of each book, you know. So what is there in common with, for example, we come now to Herzog, the novel that he wrote in 1964. And for your information, I wrote an article in the Indian Scholar 1980, on problem of self in Saul Bellow's Herzog. So most of my lecture is based on this article that I wrote for the Indian scholar. In an article printed in Encounter, Saul Bellow took a rigorous look at the tendencies in recent American fiction. He examined a number of following fellow novelists like Updike, John Updike, uh, Dust on the river down south, or something like this. Roth, Johns, Don Levy, and discerned their parts in a general tendency. The tendency of most modern writers is to reject and despise the self. Self means individuality, one's own self, one's own self. That is very important. But 20th century experience, Bellow argues, makes the rejection of the romantic conception of the unique self for the horrifying experience of this century require an intellectual, rational response. An intellectual and rational response. The individual writer now he finds tends either to retire into privacy, withdrawing, withdrawing from the meaningful notion of society, or he asserts individualism and humanism as Sartre, Beckett, and Ginsberg do in their novels and plays. Sartre, Beckett, Wettinger, Godot, you might have heard of it. The question of Bellow asks is, in this full range of possible response, he finds, like Dostoevsky, in many of these writers, an unearned bitterness. The bitterness that you don't earn, that comes to you. Unearned is that comes to you naturally. And comments, what's curious about it is, I'm quoting now from Bellow's own, you know, uh, Bellow's own article, which was published in in, in uh, some some notes on recent American fiction, Encounter. It was published in Encounter. Some notes on American fiction, recent American fiction. What's curious about it is that of, often the writer automatically scorns contemporary life. No one is happy with this present. Either we are lost in the past or we think toward the future. This is a common human nature. What else? It stinks artistically. It's enough for him that it does not allow his sensibilities to thrive, that it starves his instincts for nobility and spiritual qualities. Unquote. Bellow concludes his article with what he views as the essential question, which the modern writers have answered purely. Again, continuing with the quote, undeniably, the human being is not what he commonly thought to be a century ago. The question nevertheless remains, he is something. So what is he? What is that human being? He tries to answer in his Herzog. What is a human being? The novelist must try to meet the question with a comprehension, with a genuine desire to explore rather with insights of romantic inheritance. And Herzog is clearly an attempt to achieve this kind of awareness. Also, Bellow's article, Where Shall We Go From Here? He wrote an article called Where Shall We Go From Here? And in that article, he says, the future of fiction is the book, can be regarded as a possible, though tentative, answer to the above question. Instead of unity character, instead of unitary character with his unitary personality, his ambitions and passions, his soul, his fact, we find in modern literatures an oddly dispersed, ragged, mangled, broken, amorphous creature whose outlines are everywhere, whose being is bathed in mind and the tissues are bathed in blood, and who is impossible to circumscribe in any scheme of things, which means that a hero in Saul Bellow he becomes gold through suffering. He becomes gold through suffering. Any hero, for that matter, becomes God through suffering. Suffering is the process by which we gain experience, and that experience makes you rise, transcend the contemporary society, life as such, and makes you larger than life figure. That makes you hero. This perfectly fits Herzog. One feels tempted to say that Herzog is an attempt on Bellow's part to illustrate this concept of the modern man. What is the modern man? Suffering. You know, the basic narrative of line of Herzog is simple and intensely personal. The story of man's sufferings after his second marriage has broken up. He married Daisy first and then Madeline. The novel tells the story of Moses E. Herzog, an American Jewish scholar, of immigrant parents who originally poor, had unsuccessful, finally achieve a business success, which leaves him Herzog financially secure. You have to be financially secure to be a writer. That's what Americans believe in. Quite a rich man and free to follow the life of ideas. This is very important. That he tries to follow the life of ideas, but whether the ideas are acceptable to society, to his peers, to the people around him or not, that is to be seen. So he wants to live a life of ideas. Herzog has all the credentials of a promising intellectual, such as a PhD degree, teaching positions at metropolitan universities, and two respected books on the history of ideas. He wrote one book on the history of ideas, and the second book is Romanticism and Christianity. Christianity and Romanticism. Oh, the two should go together. It's quite famous, and he has received considerable grants for the study of the roots of Romanticism. He has been given grants by the so many societies in America to study roots of Romanticism. Now written in 800 pages of chaotic argument. Chaotic means one confused, going this way or that way. Chaotic, which was supposedly, I'm quoting from the text now, 800 pages of chaotic argument, which was supposed to have ended with a new angle on modern condition, showing how life could be lived by renewing universal connections, overturning the last of the romantic errors about the uniqueness of self. Self is important, individuality. Revising the old Western Faustian theology, Faustian ideology. Faustian means Faustian. The Faustian means Faustian ideology means Dr. Faustus, was for more knowledge and then more knowledge and then more knowledge. And knowledge, brings solace to him. That is Faustian spirit. Investigating the social meaning of nothingness. Social meaning of nothingness, is what is there in the roots of Romanticism that he's writing about. Social meaning of nothingness. Nothingness, this is existential question. Existence precedes existence, how life precedes existence. Herzog marries first a conventional Jewish wife called Daisy, whom he divorces, taken up with a passive Japanese mistress. His second marriage is to Madeline, a Catholic convert of intellectual interests but extravagant tastes. Madeline finally dismisses Herzog and lives with his best friend, Valentine Garbach, the Terrivian personality, the organizer, and up to the minute man, precisely up to the minute man, who has been cuckolding him. Cuckolding means faithless, not faithful to her, but cuckolding. Not faithful to him, but cuckolding means who's sleeping with other men. His first wife, Daisy, has the custody of his son, Marco, and his second wife, Madeline, has his daughter, June. This is also important that in American life, you live. Sometimes there are three different, kinds of children are living in the same family, under the same roof, under the guidance of the same father. For example, there are children from the ex-wife of his ex-husband of a wife, and then there are children from the ex-wife of a husband, And then there are children of them both. So sometimes see different levels of people are there in the family. So Madeline has after June of the two, Madeline has really made a fool of him after persuading him to give up his position as the university boy to buy an old house in the Berkshire. She finds she is bored with life in a country and insists that they move to Chicago. By submitting to Madeline every whim, Herzog only increases her loathing for him until at last he orders him to get out, to leave his own house, and furnishes his photograph to the police so that he cannot disturb his liaison with Valentine. He is reduced by the circumstances to a near impotent condition. You are neither here nor there. Rootless man, Herzog becomes. Neither he belongs to that girl, who was, uh, and this girl, nor to this girl who was purely flesh and nothing else. Important condition appearing to his friends and relations, and by implication to society as bordering on madness. Naturally, is bring madness, to the person. It is at this point that the narrative action begins, presenting the earlier material in retrospect. You come to know certain events as the novel proceeds, through a flashback method. And so, throwing the focus of the novel upon a short period of late spring and summer immediately after the breaking up of this marriage. Herzog seems to summarize below Bellow's feelings and aspirations worked over in the previous novels. It follows them to their extreme conclusions. Moses Herzog is a full-scale Jewish figure, as the other Bellowian heroes are. This seems to announce Bellow's intention of making something of Jewishness as significant fact as a significant in the world of the novel. Now, Jewishness is very important. All the novels of Saul Bellow are related to Jews. Jew of Malta, then Taming of the Jew, then Merchant of Venice, you have a Jew. So many Jews are very rich, of course, but then they are suffering everywhere they go. It is said that American economy is being run by the Jews, but America is a land of morals and manners. The crisis of identity that has made this modern Jewish intellectual aware of the mandates of his heritage and of his art has been initiated by his wife's adultery. His wife, has been cuckolding her. Cuckolding means faithful to other men than to Herzog. He seems terribly isolated and cut off, wandering the congested city streets, brooding apart as a lonely in the lonely rooms. We see that the significant action that takes place mainly in Herzog's mind. Significant action takes place in Herzog's mind only. His mind and his letters, which are not delivered to Vinoba Bhave, to Nehru, to others, which he goes on writing. That's called journalistic form of writing, in the sense that when you express yourself through letters, it's called journalism. It's a journalistic form of writing. It's called Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky is also in the journalistic form. Journalistic when you express yourself through letters only, you know. So we see Frank Kermode says in the book, Frank Kermode wrote, where shall we? No. Frank Kermode uh, wrote a book called Continuities. That was published in 1970. At least one ingredient is common to all the novels of him. The hero is after Kazin's phrase. Robert Kazin, wrote from Cohen to Herzog. Kazin phrase burdened with speculative quest. Speculative quest means that he is in the process of a quest. which is whether it comes succeed or not is speculative. They all have same humble need to sort out human destiny and sorting out their own. In sorting out the human destiny, however, humility comes through in their conduct. You know. So Bellow's novels, depict not heroes but anti-heroes. Herzog is also an anti-hero, you could say, anti-hero. Anti-hero is one who failed in the beginning. We take for granted that the hero is going to fail in life. Then failure is taken for granted in the beginning of the novel. Then it is called it is called a anti-hero. Bellow's anti-hero's main problem is the loss of identity as a human being in a world of conformity and mass media. Ultimately, he finds himself struggling with the deepest questions and mysteries of human existence. He constantly returns to the central problem of Bellow's work. What is it to be really human? What is it to be really human? This is important. That what contains humanity as such. The important point to grasp is that Herzog is sick in the throes of righteous subjectivism. Subjective means one who is always talking about himself. Subjectivity. Whereas in his youth, he had a certain Jewish identity to fall back upon. He is denied this consolation in later years. The world could do with a little more of love and tolerance. This is very important. This is the message of King Lear also. It's patience I need, love and tolerance. Love and tolerance are the message of King Lear also. More of love and tolerance and a little less of mad rush for success. Success is materialism. Success is paisa, money. But how is Herzog to get across the message to the world? Like the ancient mariner, the agony within him can only be stilled by unburdening himself. What's the story of ancient mariner? Ancient mariner is the story. Ancient mariner is the story of sin, punishment, and redemption. These are three stages of his. And when he meets the wedding guests, he tells them about this story. It's unburdening his own mind. That is the story of how he suffered on the sails. In his solitude, he wants to explain. He wants to explain everything, to have it out, to justify, to put in perspective, to clarify. He wants like ancient mariner. This is what self-catharsis it's called. Self-catharsis. That you want to. The catharsis is when the outlets of feelings of emotion and fears. Emotions of fear and or emotion of pity and fear. Emotions of pity and fear. That's called catharsis. And it is pity for the self and fear for what is happening around. It may not happen to you. That kind of situation. So Herzog wrestles with many ideas, many of the abstract issues. What is the value of self in an age of exploding population and mass killings? What does freedom mean when even to step out into the street is to be buffeted by evidence of limitation? Then spiritual agency of the individual is to be repressed because the individual is powerless to reject the hedonistic joke of mammoth industrial civilization. Hedonistic joke. Hedonism means what on whites. The existential problem of the individual self in modern society is set forth with telling effect by referring to Pascal. Pascal was a writer. Pascal refers to Pascal. That is, the individual today may be as bad as in Tolstoy's time. Tolstoy's character is Pascal in War and Peace. His problem is one of anonymity or lack of self. This is Herzog's problem is one of anonymity, that you are nothing. Anonymous is one who cannot say that this belongs to A, B, C, D. Anonymity means nothingness, vacuum in life. And the individual today may be as bad as in Tolstoy's time. The problems were is one of anonymity or lack of self-identity due to prevailing all-engrossing public life. The obsessions and compulsions of collectivity. The obsessions and compulsions of collectivity. When you want to live a democratic life, a collective life, there are certain obsessions, there are certain compulsions also. And Herzog realizes the obvious irony of human life in a technologically advanced civilization. The individual becomes an outsider in such a society with all its potato love. Potato love means artificial love. Artificial love, his quest for freedom, self-identity, and tranquility is naturally looked down upon by the spiritually confused age in which he is living. One popular feature is that the idea of a victim. Victim is very important. In The Victim was one of the novels written by Saul Bellow also. Victim, you might have seen. One sorry, V.S. Naipaul also, Victim. One peculiar feature is that the idea of victim is the key to the hero in all of Bellow's novels. And that's the typical Bellow hero is terribly oppressed individual. And it is with a feeling of oppression that the fiction begins. In his article on Bellow's thinkers, Ronald Webber remarks, how Bellow's thinkers. What Herzog experiences is what Philip Bumbage in Bellow's play The Last Analysis calls the attack of humanities. Humanities means human beings. Humanity as a humanities. A moment in which the human condition is suddenly too much for you. Though the disease takes various forms, all of Bellow's heroes suffer movement of humanities. For Herzog, the disease is associated with thought. He is thought sick. Thought sick means one who thinks too much is also thought sick. And the welter of abstractions which he contends, and the chaos of his personal life that he sees to clarify his own head. So Herzog is in the grip of compulsion to understand. That's where he starts writing letters. Letters which are not posted, which are not delivered at all. But he goes on expressing himself through his letters. That is called journalistic form of writing. And this compulsion to manifest itself in the habit of endless fragmentary jottings and writing letters, some unfinished, to friends, relations, dead ancestors, politicians, philosophers, and finally to God. Also writes a letter to God that I don't believe in you and your justice system. The letters are animated lively discussions that Herzog holds with several people in his desperate bid to keep his sanity and complete his self-analysis. That is also lead to self-analysis. Robert Schulman says, Schulman wrote an article on Herzog, and in his article, Robert Schulman, style of Bellow's comedy. That's the article that he wrote. Robert Schulman says, the fact that letters are not sent also contrasts significantly with the 18th century epistolary novels. You have seen 18th century Tom Jones and epistolary novels in the 18th century. I told you 19th century notes from the underground, they are letters in journalistic form. You have so many epistolary novels. Jane Austen made experiments with this also. Then you have Dickens, you have David Copperfield. You have so many authors, who believed in this kind of epistolary novels there, and thus helped to characterize the 20th century by way of obsessive modern concern with failure of communication. Why the letters are not delivered is a failure of communication. ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਲਿਖ ਦਿਓ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੋਸਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਤਾਂ what is the fun? So a strain Herzog both embodies and resists. Herzog letters to his former tutor, Harris Pulver. Harris Pulver is his former tutor. Underscores the basic thematic concern of the novel. Finally, Pulver, now yeah, I'm quoting from the text. On page 172, he says, finally, Pulver, to live in an inspired condition. Inspired condition is when one feels intoxicated with ideas. To know truth, to be free, to love another, to consummate existence, to abide with depth, to clarify in clarity of consciousness, without which, racing and conniving to evade death, and spirit holds the breath and hopes to be immortal because it doesn't not live, is no longer a rarefied project. Just as machinery has embodied ideas of good, so the technology of destruction has also acquired a metaphysical character. And have thus practical questions have thus been the ultimate questions as well. Annihilation is no longer a metaphor. Good and evil are real. The inspired condition is therefore the visionary matter. It's not reserved for gods, kings, poets, priests, shrines, but belongs to mankind and all sorts of things. I can also be inspired. You can also be inspired. So, in a sense, Herzog performs the role of a prophet, suffering for the future of mankind, for the meaningful existence. That's very important existence. For love, humanity, freedom, and happiness. That is to say, a life of positive action and harmony is what he wants, and not the life of a wasteland. You know what is wasteland? Nothing grows there. Nothing comes out of nothing. Nothing will come out of nothing. The first requirement of stability in human being was that the said human being should really desire to exist. That's on he says on page 121. It's necessary for happiness. He comes to believe well or live well if he himself doesn't want to live. Unquote. Even in the midst of acute crisis, Herzog is able to hold in check his thoughts of death by his sense of duty to himself and to his children and to his life. He doesn't want to commit suicide. He wants to avoid death. His duty was to life, to be sane, and to live, and to look after the kids. That was on page 27. In Herzog, the impulse to help, to be good, to respond to the plight of another human being coexists with the purely self-centered impulse to remain uninvolved and impassive. Impassive means regressive. The system of values which Herzog comes to accept includes compassion, togetherness, and duty. This is very important. Compassion is feeling for others, togetherness, living in cooperation with others, and duty. To Herzog, the suffering joker, I told you the Jews are suffering. The possibility for transcendence reveals itself in any part of the world. Thus, he might join the Bhave group. Bhave group is the Vinoba Bhave group. There are people, after independence, there was a movement called Bhudan, Bhudan movement. Bhudan means Bhumidadan, which means Bhave, and along with this group moved from place to one place to other to collect lands. And he collected, people gave discarded lands, to them, or you could say anything. But finally, the movement was withdrawn later on. But aim was to distribute the land to the landless people. Some of the land was also distributed by him. So Bhave Group, and here his Ludwig. Ludwig is the farm. There he works. He is there. He owns the farm. Among the poor, the dark men going on foot through their shining eyes and the light of the spirit within them presents a sharp contrast to his own aimless life. At least they live an aimful life. He has an aimless life. His ultimate concern is human goodness and the brotherhood of man. This is very important. That he thinks of human goodness. He believes brotherhood is what makes man human. On page 280 it says 280. This is Herzog says. His ultimate concern, he believes brotherhood is what makes man human. Man lives not by self alone, but by his brother's face. Man lives not by self alone, but by his brother's face. The real And the essential question is one of your employment by other human beings and their employment by us. Unquote. Herzog finally realizes that man is larger than his characteristics. Man is greater than his the of things, and social obligation, emotions, striving, the ideal construction. Life is something more than such a cloud of particles, mere felicity. Herzog discovers that the strength of man's virtue or spiritual capacity must be measured by his ordinary life. That's on page 106. By his ordinary life. Ordinariness of life is important. He learns new humanity and acquires a new charm as he ceases to strive for comprehension. Go through what is comprehensible, and you conclude that the incomprehensible gives you any light. It is on page 331. He comes to see that he must surrender the hyperactivity of a hyperactive face and put it out instead of to the radiance of the sun. Hyperactivity of his hyperactive face and put it to the radiance of the sun. That's on page 334. At the end, rather than a new letter, he has only a prayer in his heart. That's that's what ancient mariner also says. Fear at my heart and prayer at my lip. He loveth best, who loveth best, all things both great and small. For the dear God who loveth us, he made and loveth all. That's what the message of ancient mariner is. At the end, rather than a new letter, he has only a prayer in his heart directed to his mother. At this point, peaceful radiance, his face literally turned to the sun. With no new meanings and no new assertions, Herzog can abandon his letters and lapses into a jazz silence. Thus, the resolution of the self is achieved completely from within. At this time, he had no message for anyone, not a single word for anyone. That's on page 348. So, there's one critic called John W. Eldridge. Eldridge, wrote an article, wrote a book called Continuities. Eldridge wrote a book called mm, yes, the contemporary complacency of Herzog. The Devil in the Fire. The name of the book is The Devil in the Fire. That was published by Rutland and Kagan Paul in 1972, page 191. Bellow makes it so clear, says Eldridge, that Herzog's suffering is right and admirable. And suffering is not only an intellectual's occupational disease, but his badge of honor. A hero suffers. A hero becomes hero because he is suffering. We see so many movies. And movies also depict the same suffering. Very measure of his insignificance, both as a person and as a dramatic figure. Herzog discards an intellectual alienation, intellectual separatism, because what kind of synthesis is a separatist likely to come up with? You see, intellectually, you are retiring from the society. He finds himself fortunate in not having to mean to get too far away from the common life. That's very important. I mean to share with other human beings as far as possible and not destroy my remaining years in the same way. That is on page 333 of the book. Herzog realizes that he was unnecessarily worried over all the jumbled learning of the Western world. The Western, the more you learn, the more you come to know that you know nothing. That's how the Western world believes in that irrational arguments. That's why T.S. Eliot also believes in the rationality of the Western world has not been able to solve the problems of mankind. So he turns to east. Towards the end of Westland, you will see he finds Ganga to Datta Dvabdam Meta. He comes to this conclusion that east is important. Western rationality is not important that way. So Herzog realizes that he is unnecessarily worried over all the jumbled learning of the Western world, and his sanity dawning at the end of the book suggests the assurance of some synthesis as his head clears and Western ideas again begin to cohere, a synthesis beyond the errors of Romanticism and the errors of Christianity. His last letter is to the dead, is to Nietzsche. Was the one who wrote a book called God is Dead. Nietzsche was the one, existential, sorry, philosophy, Nietzsche, Sartre and Nietzsche. His last letter to the dead, to Nietzsche, the man who had declared God dead. Dear Herr Nietzsche, my dear sir, may I ask a question from this floor? तू तो ऊपर है, मैं थल्ले हूं. Pardon. Herzog has admired Nietzsche for wanting to make us able to live with void. Nietzsche said, you have to live with your loneliness. You have to live with your loneliness. That's what Nietzsche's main point is, that you have learned to live. Learn to living is more important. Kierkegaard have emphasized, but he feels Romanticism, Christianity, Nietzsche, and Kierkegaard have emphasized too strongly the value of suffering as the way to mere extended form of life, striving for true wakefulness and attitude to illusion. No wonder Herzog is very important man today. No less than the future of mankind depends upon him, as Herzog, with his usual ironic insight, is well aware. He says about himself, this is called self-irony. The progress of civilization, indeed survival of civilization, depended upon the success of Moses Herzog, that occurs on page 131, 132. But we have to bear in mind that Herzog's pervasive and many-leveled self-irony is the instrument for observing himself in the world, which helps to preserve his sanity in the face of events that are too far terrible and ridiculous to be taken seriously. Curiously enough, Herzog, the intellectual historian, has been selling reality all his life. Reality sellers they are. Reality instructors they are. And he has much help from number of first-rate reality instructors. He has dig at himself when he writes, Dear Moses, as though he writes to himself. Since when have you taken such an interest in social questions in the external world? You are never meant for, the real life. So you have started taking social questions so dearly now. Social questions in the in the external world. Until recently, you led the life of innocent sloth. Sloth means laziness. But suddenly, the Faustian spirit of discontent. Faustian spirit is the spirit of knowledge, more knowledge, more knowledge. Faustian spirit of discontent and universal reform descends on you, scalding invective. That's on page 74. He often breaks off a letter in a spirit of self-mockery, realizing how absurd he is being. After all, his own life has been a catalogue of errors. His own life has been a catalogue of errors. It appears Bellow is presenting a caricature, not only of the so-called reality instructors, but also of the hero, whose emotional immaturity has been magnified. Emotional immaturity. This is very important. The basic assumption of an intellectual is to balance his balance, and Herzog lacks that balance. Intellectual का मतलब ये होता है कि ਆਪਾਂ ਚੰਗੇ ਤੇ ਮਾੜੇ ਚ ਫਰਕ ਕਰ ਸਕੀਏ. Robert Schulman says, in a world of insistently 20th century, as Herzog, the winners of Valentine, Garbat, Madeline, Shapiro are unexpectedly formalized satiric portraits, which expose the pretensions, cliches, and fakery of the modern American literary intellectual in Bellow's version of MacFlecknoe and Dunshade and The Rape of the Lock. The way, Madeline prepares herself from her for being, a killer in modern society, that she first, she's compared to Belinda of Pope's Rape of the Lock. I shall be coming to that little later. So, Herzog's isolation in intellectual life also appeared to be comic. In fact, we are struck with the comic futility of his thinking. Shillman further says Herzog reads Dryden and Pope in his bathroom, and Pope's line, I am His Highness' dog at the key. Con is one of the self-deprecatory refrains of this broken down monarch. What is more, the solution that he reaches at the end is only a partial solution, quite unconvincing, as a rogue, in the words of Frank Kermode, in a state of peaceful choicelessness. Peaceful choicelessness is very important. When you make choices in life, you take this. Peaceful choicelessness is relaxing. Relaxing, in not exerting your choice at all. Paradoxically, a psychiatrist had deemed him an extremely immature person. He is incapable of making choices in life. He cannot reach an understanding with a woman. He decides to kill, but he doesn't. He even falls in the hands of the police because he misjudges traffic conditions and causes an accident. The world of literary and other men's ideas he can appreciate and understand. His own he cannot. This is very important. That sometimes you can appreciate others, but you yourself lack that understanding. It is like self-mockery. It's a kind of self-delusion. So Bellow has been compared with Hemingway in his attitude towards self. Michael Hoffman has pointed out that the treatment meted out to Jews in both the writers in his article From Cohen to Herzog. Hoffman says Robert Cohen is a character in Hemingway's uh, The Sun Also Rises. There's one character, Jake Barnes, is the hero of the novel, and Robert Cohen. Cohen has finally won the major battle. The hand dog Jew, who rises with was humiliated and dismissed before the end of The Sun Also Rises, has been resurrected into the form of Moses Herzog, assuming a center of literary stage denied to him by Ernest Hemingway and was reserved for him by Saul Bellow. Jake Barnes, the hero of that novel, he says you can run away from the world, but you cannot run away from yourself. So is Herzog. He cannot run away from himself. The difference between the two is that whereas Hemingway's characters face the dilemma of existence by means of action because they are afraid to think, Bellows have courage to use their intelligence despite their unheroic attitude and their lack of faith in themselves. Herzog, in his return to his personal past through memory, nostalgically evokes in some of the best sections of the novel his childhood with Russian-born Jewish mother and father in ghetto streets in Montreal. These rich, majestic sections of the novels are balanced against the colloquial sections dealing with present in the streets of Chicago and New York, where modernity reigns, the man is dehumanized by mechanics, where noise, business, and depersonalized mobs of people. The richness of this Jewish past, still kept in Herzog's compassionate, foolish, long-suffering heart, cannot find a place in the modern world. The search through which Herzog and Bellow see the modern dilemmas, remarks Hoffman, is everybody's search. But it's the Jew who's making a job more seriously, whether or not effectively. For Herzog himself, the struggle is desperate. He cannot finish his magnum opus. Magnum opus means the book on Romanticism, 800 pages, magnum opus on Romanticism, because his own quest for self has bogged down completely. Yet Herzog is not a victim of the world. He's a victim of himself, his own actions. Everyone. That's why we say that nature plays some role, but doesn't, play all the roles. So man is also responsible for his downfall. Nature alone, you won't blaming fortune or nature for that. Yet Herzog is not a victim of the world. as the world suffers his maintain in his own idea of righteousness, we see there is a spiritual triumph over the world's sordidness, its immortality, its evil, which are ugly realities. Throughout the novel, Herzog claims his suffering as his own, a product of the evil that he can refuse to know but cannot refuse to experience. In his dead father's house, looking at the old photograph, Herzog thinks a man in years. This is on page 245 of the book. A man in years he then was, but in years only. कई बार बंदे बड़े हो जाते हैं पर अंधे बच्चे तो बच्चे ही हैं. I mean, one gains in age, but not in life. This is very important. A man in years, and then he was, but in years only, and in his father's eyes, suddenly unyoung than he was. That is innocent by deliberate choice. Moses refuses to know evil, but he could not refuse to experience it. No, you can refuse to go to make a theft, to involve yourself in theft, but you can experience that. That's what Shakespeare did. Shakespeare created all the villains of the people criticized, that he had that dirty mind. No, he had not. He had experience of seeing those things, in life. So, in pursuit of the truth about self, that only the past rather than the present towards the future may reveal. No, there are three stages in life: past, present, and future. T.S. Eliot says it's past. We are not concerned with the pastness of the past, with the pastness of the present. Our past is relevant to the present. We are concerned with, and future is built on the activities of the past and the present both. The Herzog hero has in common with Augie March, the Adventures of Augie March, the novel that he wrote, and Nelson the Rain King, impatient belief that there is truth, even if it is subjective one, which is real and may be forced to yield its macrocosmic meaning. 3,000 millions human beings exist. He says in 170, page 175 of the book. 3,000 million human beings exist, each with some possession, each with microcosmos, each infinitely precious, each with a peculiar treasure. There is distant garden where curious objects grow, and there is a lovely dusk of green. The heart of Moses Herzog hangs like a peach. This is on page 175. This sense of the metaphysical quest, whether of the victim hero, the activist, or the sufferer, brings with its two attributes: the textual attribute of the play of ideas and against other in the open and finally conclusive opposition, and the felt attribute of the existential liveliness of the personal quest for subjective truth as oppressed to the abstract intellectual systematized objective truth. This is what he does in his book. Anything that you have not understood, you are most welcome. I have taken some more time. So, Navleen?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Professor Avtar Singh ji. Sir has very nicely, explained what Saul Bellow, is trying to tell us through the story of Moses E. Herzog, the middle-aged Jewish man living in Chicago, who, in the midst of his personal crisis, his personal choices, ultimately understands what life is. And definitely, as the novel is written, it was written in 1964. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So, was written in 1964, and it won the National Book Award for Fiction in the year 1965.
I skipped those details because I
No,
wanted
no, it's
to
okay, sir.
concentrate on the novel itself.
It's okay. It's okay, sir. I'm just adding so that the
He
students
got
who
Nobel
have,
Prize also.
yeah,
When
yeah,
I was a student of MPhil at Chandigarh,
yeah.
Chandigarh, he 76, 76, 77. You know, he got Nobel Prize for literature.
Yes. So, students, you must try to understand the form in which this novel is written, because besides, the protagonist, always the style also matters a lot, right? And whatever philosophy, whatever, lessons, themes that we are getting from whatever he is choosing, and how the plot has been built, again, builds your understanding about the narrative and enables you to express yourself in a better way. I'm so grateful to Professor Avtar Singh ji for having delivered this master class on American literature.
Not
Yeah, I call it a master class. I happened to talk to Mohanjit and I said, just prepare a press note that a master class on American literature has been conducted by the School of Languages with Professor Avtar Singh as our resource person. So it's wonderful.
nothing else. Nothing else.
Thank you. I
I
hope,
don't claim myself to be a specialist in anything,
yeah.
except that I have only collected from here and there things, which are helpful to
No,
the
so but
student.
yeah, this is quite beneficial for the students,
Students,
who
yeah.
are trying to grasp certain things from the
Because
plot.
if I had dwelled on life of Saul Bellow and other things or in other
Mhm.
works, it would have
Mhm.
taken half an hour more. I
I
didn't
know.
want to do that. I
Yeah.
wanted to concentrate on Herzog.
We know that we have the time restriction, also because many of the students are working, and
Yes.
they're not able to connect. But definitely we have recorded, sir, all your lectures. I have been sharing the links with you, and students, this lecture will also be available on our YouTube. Okay, Ganita, as far as your net session is concerned, I had directed Mr. Gursandesh to take a session, but he is away for 1 month, right? But meanwhile, we'll try to conduct a session. We will brief you about certain things that you require for your net examination. So we call it a day. Thank you so much, sir. Thank
Okay,
you,
sir.
students.
Okay,
Thank you,
madam.
students. Thank you, sir. Thank you,
नहीं
ji.
नहीं, okay.